You wake up and something is wrong. Your body is hot. Your limbs feel heavy. Your throat burns with every swallow. You reach for your phone and search your symptoms. You call a doctor. You walk into a pharmacy and choose from hundreds of medications designed specifically for what you have. Now, take all of that away. No phone, no doctor, no pharmacy, no understanding of what a germ even is. Just your body failing you in the middle of a world that will not slow down because you feel terrible. This was the reality of every human being who ever lived for 300,000 years. And somehow, almost all of them survived long enough to become your ancestors. The first thing to understand is that ancient humans were not helpless. They were not stumbling through illness with no knowledge at all. They had something we consistently underestimate. They had time. Thousands of generations of careful observation about which plants reduced fever, which roots stopped bleeding, which leaves numbed pain. Knowledge accumulated slowly across centuries and passed down not through books, but through people, through memory, through demonstration, through the kind of careful attention that modern life has made almost impossible. The oldest direct evidence of medicinal plant use comes from the same Shanidar Cave in Iraq where the Neanderthal burial with flowers was found. Those flowers were not random. Researchers analyzing the pollen found something remarkable. Several of the plant species identified were not local wildflowers. They were medicinal plants. Ephedra, which contains compounds still used in modern decongestants. Groundsel, used for centuries to treat pain and inflammation. Yarrow, documented in ancient medical texts across Greece, China, and the Americas independently. A Neanderthal was buried 60,000 years ago, surrounded by plants that modern pharmacology recognizes as therapeutically active. Either they were placed there deliberately by someone who knew what they did, or the person who died had been using them while they were alive. Both possibilities change everything we thought we knew about ancient medicine. Across archaeological sites on every continent, researchers have found evidence of the same pattern. Ancient humans identified the plants in their environment that changed how the body felt, and they used them consistently, specifically, and with a sophistication that took modern science centuries to fully understand. In a 49,000-year-old site in South Africa called Shanidar Cave, archaeologists found bedding made from the leaves of a plant called Cryptocarya woody, a plant with documented insecticidal and medicinal properties. They were not just sleeping on soft leaves. They were sleeping on leaves that repelled the insects that carried disease. They had not discovered germ theory, but they had discovered something functionally equivalent to it. But plants were only part of the picture, because ancient illness was never just physical. For most of human prehistory, illness was understood as a disruption of something larger than the body alone. A broken relationship with the natural world, an imbalance between the individual and the group, a spiritual intrusion that had to be negotiated with, not just physically treated. The person who held the knowledge of how to do this negotiation had a name in almost every ancient culture on Earth: a shaman. The oldest unambiguous evidence of shamanic practice dates to approximately 40,000 years ago, but anthropologists believe it is far older than that. When someone fell ill in a hunter-gatherer group, the shaman did not simply prescribe a plant. They performed a ritual. They entered an altered state of consciousness through rhythmic drumming, fasting, or plant-based compounds. They diagnosed not just the body, but the relationship between the body and everything around it. And then they treated both. What looks like superstition from the outside was actually something more sophisticated than it appears. Because the shaman was not just treating the disease. They were treating the person experiencing the disease. The fear, the isolation, the social disruption that illness always creates. They were doing something that modern medicine is only now beginning to relearn. They were treating the whole system, not just a symptom. In 2015, a team of researchers at the University of Cambridge published a study analyzing herbal knowledge of traditional healing communities across multiple continents. They found that traditional indigenous medicinal plant knowledge predicted pharmaceutical efficacy at a rate dramatically higher than chance. In other words, when a traditional healer said, "This plant treats this condition," modern chemical analysis confirmed the mechanism at a statistically remarkable rate. The knowledge worked. It had always worked. We simply spent several centuries dismissing it before we developed the tools to measure why. But not all ancient medicine was effective. Some of it was genuinely dangerous. Trepanation, the practice of drilling a hole in the skull to release what ancient practitioners believed were evil spirits causing headache or seizure, has been found in archaeological sites across 6 continents. The oldest known trepan skull is approximately 10,000 years old, and here is the part that is almost impossible to believe. Many of those skulls show bone regrowth around the hole. The patients survived. They lived for years afterward with a hole in their skull made by a stone tool, in a world with no anesthesia and no antibiotics. The survival rate in some archaeological samples exceeds 60%, which is not far below the survival rate for the same procedure in the early 20th century, performed in hospitals with surgical steel and sterile environments. The ancient sick were also cared for. This is perhaps the most important and most overlooked finding in the entire archaeology of ancient illness. Because survival from serious injury or chronic illness in the ancient world required one thing above all others: other people. In 2009, researchers studying the skeletal remains at ancient sites documented dozens of cases of individuals who had survived injuries or conditions that would have left them completely dependent on others for months or years. A healed femur fracture in a world without crutches requires someone else to bring you food and water for weeks. Severe arthritis in a hunter-gatherer group means you cannot hunt or gather. And yet, the bones show healing, long-term healing. These people were kept alive by their groups long after they could contribute economically to the group's survival. Not because it was practical, because they were people, and people were worth keeping alive. We like to imagine that compassion is a modern invention, that the further back you go in human history, the more brutal and indifferent to suffering people become. The bones tell a different story. The bones say that 100,000 years ago, someone with a broken leg was carried, was fed, was kept warm, was allowed to heal by people who had every practical reason to leave them behind and chose not to. Tonight, when you feel unwell, you will have access to knowledge accumulated across all of human history. You will have antibiotics that ancient healers could not have imagined. You will have scanners that can see inside your body without touching it. You will have more medical knowledge available on your phone than existed in the entire world just 200 years ago. And still, the most powerful medicine any of us ever receives is the same one those ancient humans were already using 100,000 years ago. Someone who stays, someone who brings you something warm, someone who sits beside you until it passes. The technology changed, the medicine changed. That part never did.